Helen, that's what my son's future mother-in-law said to me at my own son's engagement party in front of 60 people. She smiled when she said it, like it was a joke. Like I was a joke. I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at her and I thought, you have no idea who you're talking to. My name is Helen Tran. I'm 63 years old. I came to Canada from Vietnam in 1987 with my husband James, $40 in our pockets, and a suitcase that had more holes than clothes. We landed in Vancouver in February. I had never seen snow before in my life. I remember standing outside the airport watching it fall, thinking it was the most beautiful and most terrifying thing I had ever seen. James squeezed my hand. He said, "We're going to be okay." I believed him because I had to. We didn't have family here. We didn't have connections. We didn't speak much English beyond what we taught ourselves from borrowed textbooks in Saigon. What we had was each other and a willingness to work that I don't think most people born here can fully understand. Not because they're lazy, but because when you have nothing, truly nothing, work becomes something sacred. It becomes survival. And when survival becomes habit, habit becomes a life you're proud of. Our first apartment was a basement suite in East Vancouver. 1 bedroom, no windows, a radiator that clanged all night like someone was trapped inside it. James got a job washing dishes at a restaurant on Robson Street. I cleaned office buildings downtown, 3 buildings, 5 nights a week, starting at 11 at night and finishing at 6 in the morning. Then I'd come home, sleep for 3 hours, and go to my daytime job folding linens at a commercial laundry on Clark Drive. We did this for 4 years. We saved every dollar we could. We didn't go on vacations. We didn't eat at restaurants. We cooked rice and vegetables and eggs. And we were grateful for them. In 1991, we started our own company, just the two of us, Trans Commercial Cleaning. We had 1 van, a secondhand Ford Econoline with a sliding door that stuck every time the temperature dropped below 0, which in Vancouver is not often, but often enough. We printed flyers ourselves at the library. We knocked on doors. We underbid our competitors, not because we were desperate, but because we knew our work was better and we knew that once a client saw what we could do, they'd stay. They stayed. By 1998, we had 12 employees. By 2005, we had 47. By the time our son Daniel was finishing university at UBC, Trans Commercial Cleaning had contracts with office towers, medical clinics, 3 hotel properties, and 2 of the larger event venues in Metro Vancouver. We had just under $2 million in annual revenue. We owned our home in East Van outright. We drove sensible cars, a Honda CR-V for me, and a Tacoma pickup for James, because we grew up understanding that money is not for showing. Money is for keeping. Money is for your children and your children's children. Daniel didn't grow up knowing exactly how much we had. He knew we worked hard. He knew we ran a cleaning company. He knew we weren't struggling. But we never sat him down and said, "Here are the numbers." Some people find that strange. A few of his friends over the years, when they found out what Trans Commercial Cleaning was worth, would look at our house, our modest, well-kept house on a corner lot in East Van, and seem confused. How could people with that kind of revenue live like this? I always thought the question answered itself. We lived like this because this was real. The work was real. The house was real. The life was real. What would be the point of a bigger house if we'd filled it with things we didn't need to impress people we didn't care about? Daniel is a good man. He got his engineering degree and works for a firm in Burnaby doing infrastructure consulting. He's kind. He's careful. He calls me every Sunday without fail. When he told us he'd met someone, I was so happy I cried right there at the kitchen table. He showed me a photo on his phone. She was beautiful, dark hair, bright smile, standing in front of what looked like a lake somewhere up in the interior. Her name was Sophie Whitfield. I want to be fair here. Sophie is not a bad person. I believe that she loves my son. I can see it when they're together. But there is something that can happen to people who grow up with money and social standing, a certain ease, a certain assumption that the world is arranged correctly and that they are correctly placed within it. Sophie had some of that. Not maliciously, it was just there, like a watermark you only notice when the light hits a certain way. Her parents were Gordon and Diane Whitfield. Gordon was a semi-retired corporate lawyer in West Vancouver. Diane had chaired several Arts Foundation boards. They lived in a house in Dunderave with a view of the water and enough square footage that you could lose a family of 4 in the West Wing. They had a son at Queen's, a daughter doing a master's in London, and a golden retriever named something like Peyton or Wellington, I've forgotten which. They were, by every external measure, Vancouver establishment. The first time James and I met them was at a dinner at their home. Sophie arranged it. She was nervous, I could see that in the way she kept refilling water glasses that didn't need refilling and laughing a beat too quickly. We brought wine. I'd asked at the liquor store for something good from the Okanagan, a painted rock from Skaha Estates, which the man at the store said was very well regarded. I wanted to make a good impression. I wore my good coat, the dark wool one I'd bought for Daniel's convocation. Diane opened the door and looked at us, and I saw something move across her face very quickly. Just a flicker. Then she smiled warmly, ushered us in, offered us a drink, and complimented my coat. Gordon came down the stairs, shaking James' hand with the specific kind of enthusiasm men use when they're making an effort. We sat in the living room with the water view, the fireplace, and the abstract painting I later learned cost more than our first van. The dinner was pleasant on the surface. They asked Daniel about his work. They asked me what I did. I said I ran a cleaning company. Gordon nodded and said, "That must be very steady work." Diane asked how long I'd been in Canada. I told her. She said, "Oh, wonderful, the way people say it when they don't know what else to say." At some point, she mentioned a fundraiser gala she was co-chairing in the spring at the Fairmont Pacific Rim. She mentioned it twice, which I noticed. I drove home that night and told James it would probably be fine. James is quieter than me and a better judge of people. He didn't say anything, he just nodded in that way he has. That means, we'll see. We saw over the next year as Daniel and Sophie got more serious. There were more dinners, more occasions. I noticed a pattern in the way Diane spoke to me versus the way she spoke to other people in her circle. Not rude, never outright rude, but a kind of gentle condescension. She once asked me in front of 3 of her friends if I had always found cleaning to be fulfilling. The way she asked it, with that slight tilt of her head, was not a genuine question. It was an exhibition. Look at this woman who cleans buildings and finds it fulfilling. Isn't that sweet? I answered her genuinely because I am not ashamed of a single day of my working life, and I watched her friends smile with their mouths. There was a comment about our neighborhood, East Van, which has gentrified enormously but which still carries a certain old reputation in the minds of West Van people. There was a suggestion, gentle, almost caring in its delivery, that Daniel and Sophie might want to look at areas with better long-term value for when they started looking at property. There was an evening at a restaurant in Yaletown where Diane talked for 20 minutes about a trip to Tuscany, and then asked James if he had traveled much. When he said we'd been to Japan twice and to Vietnam every few years to see family, she said, "Oh, so mostly Asia, then." Not a question. James held my hand under the table at that dinner. Daniel proposed to Sophie in October at Joffrey Lakes up near Pemberton. He'd been planning it for months. Sophie called me the same day, crying happy tears, and I cried with her, and I meant every tear. Whatever my feelings about her parents, Sophie was going to be my daughter-in-law, and I loved her. The engagement party was held at the Whitfields' home in Dunderave 6 weeks later. 60 guests, mostly their side, some of Daniel's friends, a few colleagues, his university roommate Marcus and his wife, and James and me. We were the only Vietnamese people there. I noticed it not because it bothered me, but because it's the kind of thing you notice when you've spent 40 years being the only Vietnamese person in many rooms. The house looked beautiful. Diane had clearly spent a great deal of effort on it. Flowers everywhere, caterers in white jackets moving through the rooms with trays, a bar set up in the corner. I wore a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, teal with a simple neckline, and I thought I looked nice. James wore his good suit. We arrived on time and were greeted by Sophie, who hugged us both and seemed genuinely glad we were there. For the first hour, things were fine. We spoke with Daniel's colleagues, with Marcus and his wife, and with a couple who'd been neighbors of the Whitfields for years and who were completely unpretentious and lovely. Gordon came by and topped up James' drink, and they talked about the Canucks for a few minutes. I was beginning to think I'd been too guarded, too watchful. Then Diane gathered everyone in the main room for a toast. Gordon spoke about Sophie warmly, lovingly, about her childhood and her accomplishments, and what a wonderful young woman she'd become. He said he was proud to welcome Daniel into the family. People clapped. It was genuine, and I felt genuinely moved. Then Diane spoke. She talked about family legacies. She talked about the Whitfield name, which she mentioned 3 times. She talked about the kind of foundation a young couple needs, not just love, but the right kind of support, the right kind of community. She looked at Sophie when she said it, and then briefly at Daniel, and then at me. After the toast, the room dispersed back into smaller conversations. Diane made her way toward me. She was carrying a glass of white wine and she was smiling. "Helen," she said. "You must be so proud of Daniel. Such a hard worker. It's wonderful when children exceed their circumstances, isn't it?" I looked at her. "He didn't need to exceed anything," I said quietly. "He was raised well." She laughed a small laugh. Of course. I just mean the path wasn't easy, I'm sure, for your family." She glanced toward the kitchen where the caterers were moving in and out. "You know, the catering team has been just wonderful tonight. I think they could probably use an extra set of hands back there. If you'd be more comfortable, you'd be right at home with them, I'm sure." She said it lightly. The way you say something you know is a cut, but have decided to deliver wrapped in a smile so it can't be called a cut. A few people nearby heard it. I saw one woman's eyes go slightly wide and then look away. The room did not go quiet. That's not how these things happen in real life. Life is not a movie. But in my own head, everything went very still. I am 63 years old. I came to this country with $40 and no English, and I built something real from nothing over 40 years. I have never once been ashamed of my work. I have never asked for anyone's validation, and I have never needed it. I set my glass down on the table next to me. I straightened up and I looked at Diane Whitfield directly. "I would be right at home with them," I said. "I've worked alongside people like them my whole life and I have enormous respect for them, but I'm not here as staff tonight. I'm here as Daniel's mother." I paused. "And as the owner of Transcommercial Cleaning, which has a contract with your caterer's central kitchen facility on Boundary Road. We've been cleaning their commissary kitchen for 6 years. So, in a way, I already take care of this evening. I just chose to do it from this side of the room." Diane's smile did not disappear immediately. It sort of recalibrated. Her eyes moved in a way that told me she was quickly doing the math. I didn't realize." She started. "I know," I said. "That's all right." I picked up my glass and walked back toward James. "I want to tell you what happened with Daniel and Sophie because I know you're wondering." Sophie had not been standing nearby, she was across the room. But the woman whose eyes had gone wide apparently told her what happened within the next 10 minutes. Sophie came to find me. Her face was doing something complicated. She took my hand and she said, "Helen, I am so sorry." I told her it was okay. She said, "It's not okay." I told her I knew, and I appreciated her saying so. The drive home was quiet for a few minutes. Then James said, "She really didn't know about the contract." I said, "I didn't think so." He nodded. He said, well, she knows now. We laughed, the two of us, driving over the second Narrows Bridge in the dark. I want you to understand that laugh. It was not a triumphant laugh. It was the laugh of two people who have been underestimated their entire lives and have long since made peace with it, and who find at 63 and 66 years old that they still have the capacity to surprise people who should have known better than to assume. In the weeks that followed, things shifted in ways I hadn't entirely expected. Sophie had a long conversation with her mother that Daniel told me about afterward. He didn't share specifics, but he said Sophie had been very direct. Diane called me. It was a short call, and awkward, and I could tell she had rehearsed parts of it. She apologized. I accepted the apology. I didn't tell her it was fine, because it wasn't entirely fine, but I told her I valued honesty and I thought we could move forward. I meant that. Gordon reached out to James separately. Apparently, one of the guests at the party, a property developer named Harrington, whom James and I didn't know, had looked up Trans-Commercial Cleaning the next day out of curiosity and had subsequently called Gordon to ask if he'd made the connection. Gordon had not made the connection. The developer had expressed interest in speaking with us about contracts for 2 new commercial buildings he was developing in Coquitlam. We had that meeting in January. We signed in March. I don't tell you that for the satisfaction of it. I tell you because the world has a way of organizing itself around truth eventually. You can manage appearances for a long time. You can make assumptions about people based on their accents, their cars, their neighborhoods, the work they do with their hands. You can seat yourself above people you don't understand and call it social grace. But truth has a longer memory than pride does. Daniel and Sophie are getting married in September at a vineyard in the Okanagan. Sophie asked me to help her choose the flowers. We spent a Saturday afternoon going through photos together at my kitchen table, drinking tea, and I thought, this is what I wanted. Not the moment in the Whitfield living room. Not the look on Diane's face. Not the Coquitlam contract. This, my son's future wife sitting in my kitchen, laughing about flower arrangements. Belonging here the way people belong somewhere when belonging is real and not performed. The night before I sat down to tell you all of this, I called my mother in Ho Chi Minh City. She is 88 years old and still sharp and still funny. I told her about the engagement party. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something in Vietnamese that roughly translates to, people who mistake simplicity for weakness have never had to be strong. I wrote it down. I've been carrying it with me ever since. James and I built what we built because we had to, and then because we wanted to, and then because we were proud to. We built it quietly, without announcements, without anyone's permission. We drove sensible cars and lived in the same house we bought in 1999, and sent our son to university, and kept our name on our company's vans because that name meant something to us. It still does. If you are someone who works with your hands, who cleans, or builds, or drives, or cooks, or fixes, if you are someone who has ever been made to feel small in a room full of people who assumed your smallness without asking, I want you to know something. The assumption was never about you. It was always about them. Their need to place people, their discomfort with what they can't categorize, their smallness, not yours. You are not less because someone decided to look past you. You are exactly what you have always been. And sometimes, if the timing is right and you have spent long enough becoming who you are, you get to show them exactly that. I picked up my glass and walked back to my husband. That was enough.